Tonight at 10, NASA's most ambitious mission to Mars has just landed successfully on the red planet.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars.
This was the moment when the rover called Perseverance finally made it, despite all the odds, on a mission to seek out signs of ancient life.
To work through all the adversity that goes and all the challenges that go with landing a rover on Mars, plus the challenges of COVID and just an amazing accomplishment.
And this, the first image beamed back by the rover, its shadow clearly visible as it tweets, "I'm safe on Mars. Perseverance will get you anywhere." We'll have the latest from NASA also tonight. Facebook unfriends Australia. The social networking giant blocks access to news media on its site in a row over paying for content. Lockdown is working, say scientists, as new COVID infections drop by 2/3 in England since the start of the year. Barrages to block protesters in India. We report on the continuing demonstrations by hundreds of thousands of farmers and India's attempts to quell them. And the rare deep freeze in Texas that's causing chaos, leaving millions without power and water.
And coming up in sport on BBC News, Bruno Fernandes scores twice for Manchester United as they beat Real Sociedad 4-0 in the Europa League.
Good evening. NASA has just successfully landed its most ambitious ever mission to Mars. After a 7-month journey through space, the rover, called Perseverance, survived a perilous high-speed plunge through the Martian atmosphere and made it safely onto the surface of the red planet, confirming its arrival an hour ago with a tweet. These images, the first sent back within moments. It's the most advanced rover ever sent to another world, one that hopes to eventually return samples to Earth. And its mission is to search for ancient life that may have existed billions of years ago. Tonight's landing is all the more impressive given how much could have gone wrong. Here's our science correspondent, Rebecca Morell. And a warning, her report contains some flashing images.
Perseverance is going about 1 kilometer per second.
A nerve-wracking wait at mission control.
Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars.
Then celebrations as a signal is received from Mars. It's touchdown for NASA's Perseverance rover. And these are its first images, a view of its landing site before it starts to explore. The rover's even started tweeting too. "I'm safe on Mars. Perseverance will get you anywhere."
What an amazing team to work through all the adversity that goes and all the challenges that go with landing a rover on Mars, plus the challenges of COVID and just an amazing accomplishment.
It survived a fiendishly difficult landing, burning through the atmosphere at 12,000 miles an hour before a complex landing system brought it down in an area with some of the oldest rocks on Mars.
It's amongst the most ancient crust on the surface of Mars, capturing that period of time between 3.5 and 4 billion years old, which isn't a period of time that's particularly well preserved in rocks here on Earth. So we have a chance to find out about a period of the solar system that we've never studied before.
This mission is all about finding signs of life, and the best place to do that is here, the Jezero crater. Today it's dry and dusty, but billions of years ago it was a huge lake, and you can clearly see a river running into it. This gives you an idea of what it would have looked like. If we zoom in a bit more, these green areas on the edge of the crater were once beaches on the lake shore, and the hope is any microscopic creatures that once lived there are still preserved. Perseverance is the most advanced rover that NASA's ever built, and it's jam-packed with instruments. Its robotic arm is equipped with a drill to collect rock samples. So what forms of life could they contain?
I am not talking about Martian little green men, probably not even fish. We're looking for microbial life, or maybe microbes that have made a little mat or a slime of sorts that you might find on the bottom of a pond. Those are the types of things that are likely to, well, they did exist on Earth 3.5 billion years ago. The question is, did they exist on Mars at the bottom of lakes?
For the first time, NASA will also be testing a mini Mars helicopter to provide a new bird's-eye view of the planet. And back on the ground, the rover will store some of the rocks. A future mission will bring them back to Earth, and some will be heading to the UK.
These will be the most precious samples that we have on Earth, the most exciting, and scientists around the world will be absolutely fighting and clamouring to study them.
Getting to the red planet is just the start. Now the hard work begins. This is NASA's most ambitious mission and our best ever chance to know whether life ever existed on Mars. Rebecca Morell, BBC News.
Facebook is facing criticism from around the world after blocking people in Australia from viewing news content on its site in protest at a proposed new law. The Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, says he will not be intimidated by the social media company amid a row over plans to force internet firms to pay for news shared on their platforms. Facebook says the proposed legislation fundamentally misunderstands the relationship between it and organisations providing news. Our media editor, Amal Rajan, reports.
This is the internet, but not as we've known it. Never before have a democracy and tech giant collided as they have in the past 36 hours, and the aftershocks are likely to spill out across the globe. Australians woke up to a new world, unable to access news sources via Facebook, after the social media giant carried through on its threat to the government there. What's this all about? Well, over the past 2 decades, 2 deep global trends have occurred simultaneously. First, advertiser-funded Facebook and Google have become 2 of the richest companies in history. Second, the business model of newspapers has collapsed. What connects these 2 trends is advertising. A generation ago, high-quality newspapers were largely funded by advertising. Today, most advertising is online, and Facebook and Google account for around about 60% of all global digital advertising. That is a duopoly, and publishers want in on it. This is about who owes what and to whom. Led by Rupert Murdoch, Australia's newsrooms argue that their expensive journalism makes these tech platforms more attractive and gives them credibility. Australia's government agrees.
This is an assault on a sovereign nation. It is an assault on people's freedom, and in particular, it is an utter abuse of big technology's market power and control over technology.
Yet the data giants have strong counter-arguments. Publishers choose to be on Facebook because they derive value from it, both reach and traffic that can be monetised. The tech giants have set up funds to invest heavily in journalism. And moreover, they say forcing anyone to pay someone just for linking to them breaches a fundamental principle of the web and privileges one category of information, news, over others.
They want money so that people can link. Now, this kind of breaks down the way that the World Wide Web has worked up until now, and it kind of sets a dangerous precedent.
For now, British users won't be affected, but regulators and legislators everywhere will come under pressure to follow Australia's example.
If we see Australia being bullied in this manner, and effectively we end up in a situation where Facebook can get its own way, then that is going to damage other countries, including the UK, and our approach to social media and trying to ensure a safe and respectful environment.
Google has taken a different approach, signing a bespoke global deal with Murdoch's company, News Corp. That leaves Facebook short of friends. Australia is showing the world what happens when an unstoppable force confronts an immovable object. The former is technology, and particularly the data kings of California. The latter is democracy, and the argument between them will define our lives for years to come. Sophie.
Amal, thank you. Scientists say there's been a strong decline in the number of COVID infections in England since the latest lockdown began. It's working, it seems. Researchers at Imperial College, who've been tracking the pandemic, say infection rates have dropped by 2/3. But there are warnings that virus levels are still high, particularly among the under-25s. Here's our medical editor, Fergus Walsh.
Lockdown is working. Draconian restrictions on society mean coronavirus has fewer chances to spread. But that's meant closing schools, shops, pubs, gyms, putting normal life on hold. The latest evidence comes from 85,000 swab tests sent out to households across England. The survey by Imperial College from the 4th to 13th of February is good at picking up cases among those who don't know they're carrying the virus. The survey found that infections have fallen by 2/3 across England in the past month and are down 80% in London. The researchers estimate that infections are halving every 15 days, but they warn that prevalence of the virus is still high, with 1 in 200 people across England thought to be positive, similar to levels seen in September.
We know that the prevalence of the virus was much lower last summer, something like 10 times lower. And clearly, the more people who have the virus, and some of them will not have symptoms and not know they're carrying the virus, the more likely it is to transmit to other people. So the lower we can get the prevalence, the better.
There are still nearly the same number of COVID patients in hospital as at the first peak in April last year. But there are now tentative signs that vaccines are beginning to save lives among the over 80s, the first to receive a COVID jab. Deaths among the over 80s have fallen by 54% since the middle of January. Much of that is due to lockdown, but they're falling faster than in younger age groups, where they're down 45%. As more and more people get vaccinated, that should start bringing down cases as well as deaths.
At the minute, the over 70s, they only make up about 10% of cases, but over 80% of deaths. As we start vaccinating younger people, that effect that we're seeing in deaths, we should also start to see more and more in cases.
But there are concerns about the lower take-up of vaccines among Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities.
Thank you. You may not always trust what you hear and what you see, but you can trust the vaccine.
A video urging people from all ethnic backgrounds to get the vaccine is being shown across commercial TV channels, and the NHS will be distributing leaflets in 20 different languages to try to dispel myths about the vaccine.
Thank you.
The vaccines do not contain animal products or fetal products. They do not affect your fertility. So if you are offered the vaccine, please take it up, because that is what will keep you safe.
Boris Johnson will set out a roadmap for easing restrictions in England on Monday and has promised a cautious approach that will focus on data and not dates. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Well, the latest government figures show 12,057 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. An average of 12,084 new cases were recorded per day in the last week. Just over 20,000 people are in hospital with coronavirus across the UK. That is half the number it was just over a month ago at the peak. In the last 24 hours, 454 deaths have been recorded. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test. On average, 551 deaths were announced every day in the past week. The total number of people who have died is 119,387. Meanwhile, the number of people given their first dose of one of the 3 approved COVID-19 vaccines in the latest 24-hour period is more than 482,000, taking the total who've now had their first jab to almost 16.5 million people. The number of new cases and deaths may be falling, but Northern Ireland has announced that it's extending its lockdown until April the 1st. Chris Page is at Stormont for us. So lockdown is being extended, but some school children will return sooner than that.
That's right, Sophie. The devolved government here is trying to give people some hope, but tempering that with a great deal of caution. Probably the biggest change we're going to see in Northern Ireland between now and the 1st of April will come on Monday the 8th of March, when pupils in the first 3 years of primary school and children at preschool will become the first to go back to face-to-face learning. A fortnight after that, on Monday the 22nd of March, students in their last 3 years of post-primary school, so will be doing qualifications like GCSEs, A-levels and BTECs, they will go back into the classroom. Those in other year groups, though, will have to wait until after the Easter holidays. The coronavirus figures in this part of the UK are basically going in the right direction, but there remains significant pressure on the health service. For example, there are still now more people in hospital with COVID than was the case at the height of the first wave of the virus last spring. So Minister stressing Northern Ireland will only exit lockdown carefully, slowly, and they hope sustainably.
Chris Page, thank you. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has set out his vision for Britain's recovery from the coronavirus pandemic, saying it's an opportunity to break away from what he called an insecure and unequal economy. One of his key proposals was a British recovery bond, allowing millions of savers to invest in the UK's recovery from the pandemic. The Conservatives have called it empty rhetoric. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young.
He's trying to inspire a party that's got used to being rejected by voters in a political landscape dominated by a pandemic. Labour members can only watch from a distance as Sir Keir Starmer lays out his vision from an empty room.
We can go back to the same insecure and unequal economy that's been so cruelly exposed by the virus. But we can seize the moment and go forward to a future that's going to look utterly unlike the past.
He said coronavirus had proved the case for government to play a much bigger role in managing the economy, but working alongside business, not attacking it.
If we're honest, for too long, Labour has failed to realise that the only way to deliver social justice and equality is through a strong partnership with businesses. Under my leadership, that mindset will change.
One new policy idea is a British recovery bond, offering people a savings account with the government. The cash raised will be used to help get the country back on its feet after the pandemic.
There are people, of course, the ones who've kept their jobs, who have been able to save some money. How does that help those who haven't kept their jobs, who really are struggling to make ends meet?
So what the bond does is to provide a way for people to invest in the future of their country in a secure way, and obviously then releases money for infrastructure projects. Obviously, for those that haven't been able to save, etc., there are other things that I said this morning about universal credit, about the pay for key workers. So it's not either or, it's both.
And you've been leader for around 10 months. How do you think it's gone?
A year ago, in the leadership race, people were saying to me, is the Labour Party even going to exist in the future? Are you going to survive? Now, the question I'm facing is, when are you going to be ready to win a general election?
Some are calling on the Labour leader to be bolder. What do these party members think?
He rightly says we can't go back to normal, but what is normal isn't acceptable, and what we need is proper guidance and proper policy to move forward. As of yet, we haven't received that.
It's a really good start from Starmer, in my view. I get why people are saying we should be going further, but I think it sets out how things would be different if he was Prime Minister. Ultimately, the country would be in a better place.
You can talk about all the policies you like, but if they're not delivered by a credible leadership that people can believe can actually deliver them, then they won't go down well with the public.
And do you think he has managed to get that impression across?
Yes, most definitely.
Keir Starmer says a Labour government would actively support the economy, but Conservatives point out they've just spent almost £300 billion doing just that. It shows how difficult it is being distinctive as opposition leader during a national emergency. Elections across the UK in May will be the first test of whether voters like what they've heard so far. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
One of Britain's top retail bosses, Lord Wolfson, who runs Next, is calling on the Chancellor to slash business rates to give companies a financial boost and help save the high street. The business rates holiday that has been placed in place during the pandemic is due to end in April. Our business editor, Simon Jack, reports.
Signs of spring in Bedford, but like many towns and cities in the UK, the high street is enduring a winter which saw 175,000 jobs lost last year and some famous high street names shut for good. Business rates are a tax based on a property's value. Those values have changed, and with a budget round the corner, one of the survivors says rates have to reflect that if the high street is to survive.
If government wants to do something about it, the thing to do is to just discount rates by a fixed amount. Just say, look, actually, to put them in line with rents, they need to come down by around 35%. As rents on shops have been coming down, rents on warehouses have been going up, and the rates don't fairly reflect the value of warehouse property either. So I think the government can fund some of this by increasing rates on warehousing by around 50%.
Bookseller Peter Budek took a risk last year, moving into bigger premises, so will start paying rates for the first time when the current holiday ends as scheduled in April. He said the current system is stifling the growth of small firms.
The business rate factor was a big thing. We go from paying very little or zero business rates in our tiny little place before to suddenly having a substantial liability, and that nearly put me off. And if you can remove that obstacle, then you are far more likely to have small independent businesses becoming bigger independent businesses.
We've been talking about business rates reform for years, but there are 30 billion reasons why it hasn't happened yet. That's how much business rates contribute to the government coffers. But you can't tax something that's dead, and the fear is unless we get significant reform now, this decline will become terminal.
The pandemic accelerated a consumer stampede online. It's hard to compete against companies that are happy with wafer-thin profit margins. You can't turn back the clock, but you can soften the impact.
What we have to make sure doesn't happen as a consequence of that is that we end up on the other side of the equation with a hard landing in our local communities. Unnecessary job losses, unnecessary store closures.
One other lever the Chancellor could pull is an online sales tax. That would be a mistake, according to the boss of Next.
Ultimately, the consumer will pay the price of that. And actually, I don't think anyone is going to go back to the high street because there's a 2% online tax or whatever number they come up with. You know, that you cannot tax people back onto the high street. The internet is winning because it just has so much better choice, not because it's much cheaper.
The Chancellor may well extend the rates holiday next month. The government insists that business rates are once again under review. High street shops aren't worthless, but they are worth less. Survival depends on rates, recognising that. Simon Jack, BBC News, Bedford.
The French President Emmanuel Macron says Europe and the United States should send up to 5% of their coronavirus vaccine supplies to developing countries as quickly as possible. Our Paris correspondent Lucy Williamson joins us now. So what's prompted this idea now?
Well, there's a couple of reasons behind this idea. One is timing. The EU already has a programme to fund vaccines for developing countries. It's ordered 2 billion doses of them, but it's going to take until the end of this year for those doses to arrive. So this is a way to try and get doses into those developing countries more quickly. Tonight, the Elysée told us that if France's own orders arrive as planned, it should be able to meet its contribution without slowing down its own vaccine programme. The other reason that's driving this idea is what the Elysée is calling vaccine diplomacy by countries like Russia and China, which are rushing to plug the gap in those developing countries. President Macron has always been very keen that the West stand up for its global influence and stand together. But there's been more than one tussle over the strategy and the moral high ground when it comes to vaccination programmes. So we'll see how his idea goes down with G7 leaders at their video meeting tomorrow.
Lucy Williamson, thank you. For more than 2.5 months, hundreds of thousands of farmers in India have been protesting against new agricultural laws passed last year. They've drawn global attention, and the government's handling of dissent has become a grave cause for concern. Activists and journalists are being charged with serious offences, and there have been internet shutdowns at protest sites. The government says it's reacted with utmost restraint, but critics say democracy in India is taking a worrying turn. From Delhi, our India correspondent Yogita Limai reports.
This is a startling sight in a democracy. A deadly wall on the road to the national capital to keep out protesters. In India, the right to dissent is guaranteed by law. Farmers have for months been opposing new agricultural bills. During these largely peaceful protests, there have been internet shutdowns, and activists and journalists have been jailed. Mandeep Punia was arrested while covering the protests. Out on bail now, he's accused of assaulting policemen. I was beaten with batons. Those of us who are showing what's really happening on the ground are being targeted by people in power, he told me. Over the past few years, India's seen repeated crackdowns on people critical of the government and its policies.
With these farmers' protests, though, for the first time since Narendra Modi became Prime Minister in 2014, India's actions have grabbed widespread international attention. Foreign celebrities and governments have urged this country to uphold democratic rights and freedoms.
Climate activist Greta Thunberg was one of them. She also shared a file which listed ways of supporting farmers. A criminal investigation was started over the document. And now, Indian police have arrested this 22-year-old woman, Disha Ravi, for editing the file. She's charged with sedition, which carries a life sentence. Many of those who've campaigned with Disha took to the streets.
Today what we are seeing is the central government decides to attack young people, innocent people, and frame them in all sorts of ridiculous charges.
Accountable and hypocritical.
Nidhi Razdan is one of India's most prominent journalists.
This government doesn't take kindly to criticism. It does not take kindly to dissent. We are the world's largest democracy. But at the same time, what we are seeing increasingly over the last few years is a backsliding of that democracy.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi doesn't hold press conferences. His party didn't want to speak to the BBC.
Foreign destructive ideology.
In Parliament, there was a strong pushback against foreign commentary on what the government says are internal matters for India. But civil liberties are universal, says Supreme Court lawyer Karuna Nandi.
When there are young black people that are shot in the United States by police officers, this is a universal human rights issue. When the junta takes over in Myanmar, when there are free speech crackdowns in my country, that is an international human rights issue.
Many in India continue to challenge the government, but increasingly they're doing so in a climate of fear. Yogita Lemay, BBC News, Delhi.
Here, a technical manager at Arconic, the firm which made the Grenfell Tower cladding, told colleagues poor fire test results on the product needed to be kept very confidential. The request, written in capital letters, was made in an email sent in 2010 and produced at the public inquiry today. The email was sent by an Arconic manager in France who has refused to give evidence. 72 people died in the fire at Grenfell Tower in 2017. The Duke of Edinburgh is spending a third night in hospital for observation and rest. He was admitted earlier this week after feeling unwell. Prince Philip, who's 99, is said to be in good spirits in the King Edward VII Hospital in central London. His stay is not related to coronavirus. Politicians in the US have been questioning key players in last month's frenzied trading of GameStop shares. Independent traders swapping tips on social media forums sent the gaming chain's stock price soaring. Some major Wall Street investors who had bet that GameStop's share price would go down lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Here's our North America technology reporter, James Clayton.
This is a story of how millions of online users got together to make some hedge funds lose millions of pounds by investing in this chain of shops.
GameStop sells games, physical games on the high street. But with gaming increasingly going digital, its future looked bleak. And that was noticed by a certain type of trader.
Some Wall Street traders bet that the company's shares would go down, and if they did, they'd make money. But members of an online forum noticed that and bought shares by the bucket load, helping to make its value soar.
But based on prevailing sentiment, the market and popular culture, many think it's a foolish investment. But everyone's wrong.
Investors were often young and bought the shares on trading apps.
Watching this chart gives me heart problems, I swear to God.
This time last year, GameStop shares were worth £3. At one point in late January, they'd risen to £350 a share. I travelled to Los Angeles to meet Andrew Left, the controversial founder of hedge fund Citron. He's well known on Wall Street for shorting stocks. He bet against GameStop, a bad decision.
So can I ask how much you lost in total?
I think the fund was down approximately, I don't even know, 18%.
How much is that in cash terms?
I won't discuss that.
That figure is certainly in the millions and likely the tens of millions. But many other amateur investors lost money on the way down too. In Washington today, House representatives were trying to find out how this could have happened. This directed at the company that hosts Wall Street Bets, Reddit.
This episode exposes a serious threat to our financial system when tweets, social media posts do more to move the market than material, legitimate information.
In this specific case, we did not see any signs of manipulation.
Andrew Left says he's now going to be much more careful in the future about shorting stocks.
There's this narrative that this was a David and Goliath story. It was all of these hedge funds like yours against the people.
If a 5-year-old walked into this room right now, I could probably kick his ass. Any 5-year-old. If 1,000 5-year-olds walked in here, they could probably take me down. Just being honest about it. Is that a David versus Goliath story? No.
GameStop's crazy swings lost hedge funds like Citron a lot of money, but other normal investors lost out too. Regulators now need to work out whether what happened was legal and whether more should be done to stop this from happening again in the future. James Clayton, BBC News.
A blast of Arctic weather has brought with it blizzards and record low temperatures across the United States, including to many southern states unused to such weather. In Texas, it has sparked an energy crisis. At one point, more than 4 million households were without power. Our US correspondent Lebo Diseko is in Houston for us now.
Yeah, well, the snow may have cleared somewhat, Sophie, but it is still freezing, and President Biden has declared a state of emergency. Nearly 7 million people have been told that they need to boil their tap water here. That's because the water treatment facilities were hit by power outages. This state just isn't used to weather like this, and authorities and infrastructure just were not prepared.
This is one of the richest states in one of the richest countries in the world. Drinking water and food supplies running dangerously low, and homes are flooding because pipes, once frozen, have now burst.
Last night we got power after 2 days, and we didn't have water, but finally we got water. Now we have water everywhere.
Texas would normally be around 15 degrees Celsius at this time of year. As temperatures hit -18 in some parts this week, the state was unable to cope. Many here are dealing with a 4th day without electricity after the power grid failed. State Governor Greg Abbott has been criticised after blaming frozen wind turbines for the collapse of the electricity grid. Today, power was restored for some, but officials are warning that progress will be slow.
That said, I also want to be clear with Texans, because you need to know there will be more cold temperatures in various regions across the state of Texas tonight.
Many scientists say this is the impact of a changing climate, warm air moving up to the Arctic, forcing cold air down to states like this one. It was colder in Texas this week than in Alaska. In the midst of this crisis, kindness. These sea turtles would have frozen to death had it not been for volunteers braving the weather to rescue them. It's forecast to be dangerously cold once again tonight. Texans are being told to have a plan to keep their families warm as the threat of yet more power cuts looms. Lebo Diseko, BBC News, Houston, Texas.
And that's it from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Good night.